So, what does your religion have to say about the Sabbath or the carving out of sacred time?
The big question is, what is the Sabbath? What is Shabbat in the Jewish tradition? So let me begin with the late 19th, early 20th century aphorism of Ahad Ha'am. That was the pen name of Asher Ginsburg. He was a modern Hebrew writer and the father of what is known as cultural Zionism. And he famously said, Yoter mishe Yisrael shamra Shabbat, ha-Shabbat shamra et Yisrael. Which means, more than the Jewish people observed the Sabbath kept the Jewish people. And I think that was true 2,000 years ago, and it's true today in modernity, that if you are looking to understand what keeps the Jewish people together, there are many potential candidates. But the Sabbath is an excellent example of how the Jewish tradition is transmitted from one generation to another. If you look at Jewish families that observe the Sabbath in any way or in a most traditional way, you will often see families who produce children and grandchildren who follow in those footsteps and are able to embrace Judaism fully and with continuity. That doesn't mean that there is a determinative way to observe the Sabbath, but that when the Sabbath is central to one's Judaism, there is a good chance that that is a Judaism that will be transferred from generation to generation. And staying with modernity for a moment, the Sabbath for the Jewish people has been, for most who observe it, an opportunity to assure that there is a moment when the family is together without any excuses. In many homes, the Friday night Shabbat dinner is the last remaining sacred family time, where there are no alternative options allowed, where everyone is expected to be there. Even if in some cases they will go off and do something else after the Friday night dinner, but they're there. And for many Jews, it is also the time where they focus on their attendance at synagogue. Many, many Jews who do not go to synagogue on a daily basis make a point of going to the synagogue on Shabbat, on the Sabbath. So it's fair to say that from a modern perspective, it's a critical piece of the glue that keeps the Jewish people together across denominational lines. In its ancient understanding, which we can deal with more deeply as we speak tonight, of course, it was about a resonance with the creation story. God created the world, according to the Genesis account, in 6 days and rested on the seventh, and we emulate God's example by resting on the Sabbath. And in the Deuteronomic version, the attribution is because you were slaves in Egypt. So if in the Genesis and Exodus version of that, it's about being at one with the creation, suspension of technology, of you as a human being mastering nature. In the Deuteronomic version of the Ten Commandments, it's attributed to the Exodus from Egypt. In simple terms, 6 days of the week, maybe you work for someone else, but the seventh day is for God, which also means that it's for you. And you have some independence in an economic sense, that you're not subject to the whims and the pulls of society and the workplace.
What has happened to Christianity and Judaism that we can come together on a beautiful evening, one that reminds us of creation itself, and begin to speak of the most important observance of time, time when God has acted in our lives. This is what Shabbat is about. It is the rejoicing with God in His presence for His acts of creation and redemption and love. Shabbat is for Christians not any longer the opposite of the day for the Jews, as has been true so long in the Christian West, where if you said to a Catholic, "What is Sunday?" they'd say, "Well, it's not Shabbat. We are not Jews here. Jews have their day, we have our day, and the two don't meet." I hope that division is gone, because the original followers of Jesus did not see it that way and did not observe it that way. Jewish Christians, if I can use that term, kept to their Jewish life and culture, both in the time of Jesus and until the temple was destroyed and long after, so that they lived as Jews, rejoicing in and observing Shabbat. But they added one more day to it, what they called the eighth day, the day in which their belief that Jesus as Messiah has risen and not destroyed Judaism, not gotten away from it, not left it, none of that. Instead, for the original Christians who are Jews first, Jesus as Messiah brings to a kind of fulfillment in Himself as Messiah everything that's important for them as Jews and for them as creatures of God. It's not a question of being opposite to Judaism. It's a question of growth from Judaism. Christianity depends on Judaism to be what it is. Judaism is inside Christianity. The reverse is not true. Judaism does not rely on Christianity to be what it needs to be, but Christianity relies on Judaism to know and have its essential identity in place. What is Sunday for a Christian? It is Shabbat plus one. That's what Sunday is.
Thank you for these wonderful reflections to get us started. And so let's continue with some of the foci of the Sabbath in our different communities. You've touched on some of that already, but what's the calculus? Is the focus God? Is it family? Is it the identity as a religious community? Is it the family community? You know, I am old enough to remember the blue laws, and if you didn't have enough milk after church, well, the store had closed. And eventually, Sunday was the homemade marinara sauce and the meatballs after Mass, you know. But, so what are our foci?
There is no one Jewish answer, ever. If someone says to you, Judaism says, stop listening, because there isn't one Judaism. It's a multiplicity of Jewish practice and Jewish observance. So, for the strictly Orthodox and those committed to halakha and Jewish law, the Sabbath is part and parcel of a very careful observance of the details of Jewish tradition, which includes cessation of work, creative work as it is defined in the Jewish tradition, not participating in commerce. Many not using electricity that is not already ignited, not carrying from one domain to another, even if it's a handkerchief, not speaking on the telephone, not writing, not riding in a car. All of these are Jewish details of law that characterize the largest body of observant Jews, not the largest number of Jews affiliated with the denomination, but those who take the details seriously and punctiliously. Those are primarily Orthodox Jews, but not exclusively. And their manifestation of Shabbat observance is very focused on both the positive, joyous expression and making Shabbat like no other day in the week by ceasing from doing what is called milacha, work, and as it has been defined and reinterpreted throughout the generations as new and new technologies need to be understood through the prism of the original understanding of what work is. And the other part of this is how you embrace the day with complete joy and excitement and food and social interaction and learning. So in answer to the question, depending on who the Jew is and what their practice is, it includes both positive affirmations of Jewish identity through prayer, family, communion with God, and also prohibitions. Abraham Joshua Heschel famously said that the Sabbath is a palace in time. He focused on the idea that Judaism primarily, although not exclusively, focuses on the sanctification of time more than the sanctification of place, in which you can build buildings wherever, of course, with a centrality of holiness to Jerusalem and to the Holy of Holies in the temple in Jerusalem of old, and still true today for the Jewish people, that holiness, but that the most important sanctification is the sanctification in time, where you took the mundane and you made it holy. That really is the most critical idea of what the Sabbath is, where you take the everyday and you sanctify it by making it special. And then all of those behaviors that I spoke about have a vessel within which they can be placed. Someone once said that the laws around the palace are like a moat. In order to protect the palace in time, that those restrictions that are observed primarily, although not exclusively, today sociologically by Orthodox Jews, they help to protect that palace in time. They are a vehicle to create that kind of environment.
To be a Christian, to be a Catholic, is not to be opposite to Judaism, against Judaism, or apart from Judaism. It is to build on Judaism, grow from Judaism, and grow with it. The early followers of Jesus would have been used to understanding and thinking exactly that way about Shabbat, exactly that way. So that if we want to understand what was Sunday to them, we have to say it is Shabbat plus one. That is to say, Sunday becomes for them the day on which they observe, remember, and relive always their discovery of the resurrection of Jesus, their Messiah. That's the day which makes Shabbat for them eternal. Sunday is the everlasting Shabbat. Sunday is Shabbat without end. Sunday is the only day because it's the day of heaven. It's the day in which all time reaches for. It's the day inside of which all time is fulfilled, because it's Shabbat plus one. The Christian belief is that Jesus rises at dawn on the day after Shabbat. And what he does is use Shabbat as the doorway into eternity. 365 days, says George Herbert in one of his poems. We have 365 days, he said, but really only one is the eternal day in God's presence. And for Christians, Sunday is a sharing in that day that will have no end at all. That day of an eternal banquet, which is why Christians, Catholics go to Mass. The exchange of bread and wine, the hearing of God's word, the taking care of the poor, the joining later as families. These are foretastes of heavenly joy that we hope to share with each other and with God on Sunday. Not in spite of or in contradiction to or opposite from Shabbat, but because of it. But because Jesus' resurrection uses Shabbat to open the door to the eternal day of Shabbat in heaven.
I knew I picked the right people. Having discussions like this makes me, just feel, yes, let's just stay in that one day, that vessel of time. But we do live in a data-driven world. And because I am a Christian theologian, so I always tell my students I can't get beyond 3 numbers, right? Trinitarian, all of that. I'm going to leave big numbers to other folks. So what are the current statistics? Do we have any statistics about Sabbath observance, Sunday observance?
I think you had the best stats from the Pew report. So I promise, Rabbi, I'll do the next one. I'll lead on the next one if you'll give us some numbers to crunch.
So this is a good segue from what I just spoke about, because I described the most intense Jewish community that we are familiar with, those who are very committed to the strictures of halakha, of Jewish law, manifest primarily but not exclusively by the Orthodox community here in the United States. I'm not speaking about the whole world now. But there are other ways that Shabbat is observed. And modernity, of course, gave birth to new understandings of Judaism, which we commonly refer to as Reform, Conservative, Reconstructionist. And they have differing views of what it means to observe Shabbat. The conservative movement committed in its institutions to Shabbat observance quite like the Orthodox institutions, but the laity less meticulous than is manifest in Orthodoxy. The Reform movement famously giving autonomy in decision to its adherents as part of its understanding of how Judaism and modernity is going to come together. So, how one measures the observance of Shabbat in today's day and age has a lot to do with what questions you are asking. Now, the new Pew study, which received a lot of attention, asked a few questions that are particularly related to Sabbath observance. One of them directly and one indirectly. The one that is directly was the question of, do you light Sabbath candles on a regular basis? And the answer to that was approximately 1 in 5 American Jews light Friday night Sabbath candles. I find that to be a believable figure. Why? Because approximately 10% of adults in the Jewish community are Orthodox. I'm pretty certain that the overwhelming majority of Orthodox Jews, as they are so labeled or call themselves, light Shabbat candles. I'm rather certain that a significant small percentage of other Jews also regularly light Shabbat candles. This number is similar to the number of Jews who claim that they visit a synagogue at least once a month at a service. I hasten quickly that this is a notoriously difficult question to get honest answers to. And Jews have been the most honest of Americans, or in reality poll as the least attending of houses of worship. Always, historically, in all of these surveys done by Jews or by others in comparison to other groups. And also about 1 in 5 families say that they maintain kosher or kashrut observance in their home. Now we all know that that can mean many different things, but it probably means that they observe part or all of the kosher laws in their home. That may be, in my opinion, because of the definition of kashrut, harder to know for sure. Like candle lighting, do you light candles or not? That's a yes or no. Do you keep kashrut in your home? Depends what you mean by that kind of question. Some people don't mix meat and milk. Some people have only one set of dishes, but have kosher meat, all kinds of permutations. I think that that is a good baseline, that approximately 20% in all of those categories are people who engage Shabbat seriously in some way. I think that's a reasonable, believable number, and therefore a very challenging number about the continuity of Shabbat in the American Jewish experience. It is not a very high percentage, and as I said, possibly half of those are Orthodox Jews. And that raises the question about the rest of American Jewry.
Challenge is the word on this matter. And I think, Rabbi, that your statistics for the Christian, which includes Protestant and Catholic observance of Sundays, was someplace in the 60 percentile. That Protestants and Catholics and Orthodox across the board report a number that averages out to around 60-something%, observing it every week. And usually that's measured by, do you attend Sunday services of some kind? I look at that and I shake my head. I'm sorry, I'm skeptical. I'm always on the other side looking out. Are there 60% of you here? And those of you who are here, are you 60% here? I'd have to say no. I have to say no. The problem with the statistics taken from Pew and other places is this. Really, all Catholicism is local. In a way, I think all Judaism is local. It's very hard to describe with a single percentage number what the experience of local religious communities are. everybody knows that in the U.S., the Catholic attendance at Mass and other sacraments has taken quite a dive in the last 15 years, probably due to the abuse crisis and other things. In New York City, in the last 2 years, a poll was released amongst just pastors in the parishes, comparing the number of Catholic marriages in the Archdiocese of New York now versus 10 years ago. It is 2/3 less than it was 10 years ago. And yet I see lots of young people at Mass. They're obviously in love. They're obviously with each other. And they say, "Good morning, Father." And I'm thinking, it is a good morning, you know? I wonder, do they consider marriage? Do they take the sacraments? Where are they? Culture has shifted, societal norms have shifted, perceptions have shifted. A lot has gone on, and numbers are very hard to nail down this shifting experience. That's my first point. My second point is that, especially with young people, the observance of Sunday and Shabbat by extension is very surprising for its kind of unorthodox way. I'll give you an example. Georgetown, which is where I teach, is obviously run by the Jesuits and thought of as very left of center. Now, I'm not a Jesuit. You're in a Jesuit-free zone, okay, this evening, and I'm just a humble priest, all right? And at Georgetown, we take religion very seriously. You can have as much of it as you like or none of it, okay? Whatever you want. We have a full-time Muslim chaplain, a full-time Jewish chaplain, a full-time Buddhist chaplain, Hindu chaplain, Jainist chaplain, 4 different Protestant chaplains, a whole staff of Catholic chaplains. We have chaplains on every floor of every dorm. There's lots of religion everywhere. What does it mean in terms of observance of the Sabbath? What it means for young people at Georgetown is the freedom to experiment and experience across religious borders on the respective days of worship for all their friends and with all their friends. So I decided I would do a sneaky thing. I dressed as a human being one day, and I went Friday night to Jewish services and Saturday to Muslim services and Sunday at Georgetown to all the big range of Christian services. And I would count the number of students that I saw across the board. Now, the undergrad student body is 6,000, kept that way. I counted 3,240 students on one weekend going to at least one service across the board. That's a lot.
Wow.
That's more than 50% of all the undergrads. And it doesn't count the Christian varsity crowd, the Orthodox kids, the traditionalist Catholics, all of whom take buses and go off campus to other different services. In other words, how young people observe Shabbat, Sunday, the day of rest, God's day, varies according to their need to experience and to explore that within all kinds of different communities. So that when we ask, like in the Pew poll, do you go to Mass on Sunday? That's the deal. The answer could be any percentage, and it's not reflecting what young people do. Young people want to be with their friends. They want belonging. They want membership. They want love. They want community. They want identity. And it takes a while to find that by experimentation. So I would say, deceptively, these numbers throw us off the real trail of the beautiful souls that I suspect are our neighbors and friends and relatives and families, of many people, young and old and middle-aged, trying to find Shabbat, if I could say it that way. Young folks, middle-aged folks, older folks in search of Shabbat and looking for it in new places.
What do our traditions mean? What do they really evoke when we use those words, observe and remember? And I think that maybe even gives us a horizon to the first question when you gave us all a very good introduction to the spirit of the Sabbath.
This is an interesting question because we just finished the observance of 9/11. And I have a group of seniors in a very interesting course called Holocaust by Bullets. The study of the Holocaust in Eastern Europe, mostly in what would have been the Soviet Union, with the great forensic anthropologist Patrick Dubois of Paris. We are team teaching. And every student in the School of Foreign Service wanted into that course, and I had the cap it at 43, so it's full of smart seniors in the School of Foreign Service, all of whom want to save the world. That's what they do. And we meet on Wednesdays. So a week ago, I said to them, how old were you when 9/11 happened? And there was this 5, 4, 6 and a half, 5. I think it was 7. I'm not sure. I said, so tomorrow is 9/11. What are you going to do tomorrow to remember that? Blank, completely blank stares. What's to remember? What's to remember? You amaze me. You absolutely amaze me. It's gone over your head already. Let me put it in focus for you. Tonight, I said, the President of the United States is going to give a major address on television and put into red-hot focus why, yet again, on the anniversary of 9/11, isn't that interesting, we must reconsider engaging militarily against terrorists in the Middle East. Did that part get by you? Oh, yeah. Did it also get by you that the first beheaded victim from the self-proclaimed caliphate people the week before was Roman Catholic, and the second was Jewish? Both of our communities are feeling this and a need to focus and rearticulate remembrance of what 9/11 started, but what this week and last week continue. What is it to remember? It is to continue to live inside the experience that began with those before us and is bequeathed to us as something to carry on. We are formed by that experience. Who in here, who in my class could stick up their hand and say 9/11 has made no difference to my life? That's absurd. To remember 9/11 in some way is to re-participate in the events and the effects of that set of events on us as a people. And to observe it is to honor what has happened there by appropriate markers of recollection and aesthetics and writing of names and mourning of dead and of understanding the nature of conflict, and most important of all, living in the action of God who is present in these events, mysteriously present. To observe Shabbat is to observe God's actions that brought Shabbat about. It is to observe creation, it is to participate in it, and it is for Christians to see the resurrection as the day that opens up creation for eternity. It's easy for us to let go of memory, and when we do observance, go silent. So it was surprising to me. I looked hard at Georgetown all the next day. Where is the observance of 9/11? There were some flags students had put in the lawn near the American flag, the big one. And other than that, there was nothing. And I thought how fast we are to forget this, but how careless we are to fail to connect the past to even the urgent events of this day. Big editorial the next day, Friday, in the newspaper, signed by all kinds of kids. We should never forget 9/11 and the change it brought to Americans and our lives. What has happened to us? That in one of the cities pre-selected for attack, we did nothing. We didn't even stop in silence at the time the World Trade Centers were struck. There was no bell, no candle, no book of prayers. We're losing that. Being reignited, maybe, by the urgent events of our brothers and sisters being killed yet again by terrorists, can help both memory and observance come back to life.
When you compare the Exodus version of the Ten Commandments and the Deuteronomy version of the Ten Commandments, there are two versions. One, shall we say, in real time, when the revelation took place as recorded in the book of Exodus at Mount Sinai through the intermediary of Moses from God. And then when Moses retells the story and recapitulates what happened in his lifetime of teaching, in his swan song, his last message to the people, he reiterates the Ten Commandments. And there are stylistic differences between the two versions, but none more dramatic than what Jews count as the fourth commandment. I know there are different countings between the traditions, and maybe we can enlighten one another on that in a moment, but for us it's the fourth commandment, the Jewish people. And in the Exodus version, it says, Zachor et Yom HaShabbat lekodsho. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. And in the Deuteronomy version, it says, Shamor et Yom HaShabbat lekodsho. Observe or guard or keep the Sabbath day to keep it holy. And the rabbis understood this as the difference between positive actions and refraining from certain activity. So remember, Kadshehu al hayayin, the Talmud says, sanctify it over wine. Do things that cause you to remember the Sabbath. Buy special foods. Prepare properly. These were the positive activities. I have to tell you that in growing up in a Sabbath observant home were the most indelible actions of impact on my evolution as a Jew. Coming into the home on a Friday afternoon, just as I try to create for my own family today, smelling the smells of Shabbat, the rush to prepare, the sanctity of time for the family, where the Friday night dinner could go on for hours, and it wouldn't be a real Friday night dinner if the table were not strewn with atlases, dictionaries, and encyclopedias. And that's true to this day, because most Jews who are careful about Jewish law don't Google on Shabbat. And there are many who observe Shabbat in that way, who don't turn to the news or the radio or the TV or the computer. It's a completely different experience. But the Shamor was what I referred to earlier. The details that tell you what you can and cannot do in order to make this day different. And the wonderful process by which new activities that were unknown are adjudicated through Jewish law as to whether they are appropriate on the Sabbath. The big one in the 20th century was what? the automobile? Is the automobile part of the continuum of fire is prohibited on the Sabbath? Or is it a completely different beast, and therefore you're allowed to drive on the Sabbath? Those kinds of questions. So that's the Zachor and Shamor, the positive affirmations of activity through remembrance, and the change in lifestyle that is represented through Shamor, observe, guard, keep, live a different kind of life on that day so that you can have a taste of the world to come, which Father McManus referred to, which, by the way, we have in both of our traditions regarding the Sabbath. I learned that tonight.
So the table, Shabbat table, is strewn with the books and the maps and the atlases. What does Sabbath observance offer to us in this information-saturated, technologically obsessed, and hyper-achievement-focused societies of our developed nations?
The two most common words I now say at Georgetown during the course of the day are not good morning, good afternoon, how are you, oh, or any of that. It's this: look up. Look up. You're about to run into an old person. You are doing this on your whatever, okay? You are sticking things in your ears and changing channels. You are looking at your iPad. Look up, look up, look up. Don't hit me, all right? You, as a young person, are becoming enslaved, is my message to my students. You must be careful not to become enslaved by these devices which were originally meant to help you, and you own them, and I am afraid that now they own you. And when we talk about the obsession of the technology that's given to us, there's a spot someplace in all our lives, it's probably a different spot, where we cross the line between using the technology to enhance what we are about, and where we become enthralled by the technology and we surrender to it and enter into the private world that we can create with it. This worries me for many reasons, because I think it wrecks social skills. It diminishes conversational skill and technique in young people. It draws young people into an intensely private, personal world of their own construction. I listen to my own music and I go within. Technology helps me to escape, Father. I don't need this and I don't need that. Yes, you do. You need it all. You need within and you need without. You need music and you need silence. But most of all, you need conversation, which can be found in both music and silence and conversation. And so when we're talking about Shabbat, what I think is that Shabbat invites you into a bigger world than the world that you get with high-tech help. It is the world, so to speak, of the invisible, the world you cannot see, but the world you must learn to see, the world you must learn to feel, because it is the world of love. It is the world of knowing. It is the world of seeing. It is the world of hoping. It is the world of rejoicing in those around you, in the God who made you, in food and drink and conversation and family. Your screen is not your family. The ones around you, we are your family. And it is the family of God that draws you into celebration on Shabbat. Not the family of the internet, not the hidden world of games and all the rest of that. It's a different family. What I would love to see is Shabbat observance where people, young and old, put all these information technology things aside and turn them off and allow themselves to experience on a different level, in a different way, the human and divine community that would embrace them. Don't think for a minute that this is just a young person's problem. I live in Washington, D.C., where there are more attorneys than anywhere else on earth, okay? Every attorney has at least 2 of these. They bring them all to Mass every Sunday. They ring, they buzz, they tone, they beep, they crawl on the bench by themselves. And I say to myself, what kind of life do you live when you are tethered to it rather than it to you? Come to Shabbat, come to Sunday, where the line is to God, the line is to those around you, the line is to love.
I am evidence of this problem. If it weren't for Shabbat, I would be a 24/7 slave. Because of Shabbat, I am only a 24/6 slave. I have separation anxiety from my technology. But because Shabbat is so ingrained in my life experience, that value trumps this obsession. And I'm not a young guy. It's even more so with the younger set.
Yes.
This has even been a problem in the communities where Shabbat observance is taken very seriously. There have been articles in the Jewish media about the epidemic of Shabbat texting among observant Orthodox young Jews. I don't know how rampant it is, but it was enough to get media attention. Young people who are observing Shabbat fully, but are grappling with that one piece because it's so much a part of their lives. I can't think of a time when we needed Shabbat, the Sabbath, or whatever you want to call it. Like you read in the business pages of the media, rules for employees about answering emails. And when you're allowed to send non-emergency emails, not between the hours of 8 p.m. and 8 a.m. or whatever the rules are. These are corporations that are developing these kinds of rules. These are Shabbat rules. They are rules that are being implanted from this idyllic view of what the Sabbath is into a society that never before needed it as much as it needs it now. And of course, this is the same society that can't have a family meal together on a weekday. We don't have to go back to the 1950s TV version of everyone is at the table at the same time. I'm not sure it was realistic then, but it surely is not realistic now. But there needs to be sacred time for family where everyone is at the table and nobody is touching their equipment. Small, big, larger, filling the whole room. We have everything today. Read a book, for God's sake.
Amen to that. Soccer, Little League, lacrosse. When to play, when not to play, and all those other questions that it raises.
I'll do it.
Whatever you'd like.
Well, this is a question that families face, don't they, when kids want to play sports, which is terrific. But notice is what I say to families about this. Notice something for you. Sunday has become not a family day or not a day of going to a museum or looking at beautiful things or listening to music or having a meal together or reading or enjoying company or visiting grandma or any of those things. Even if you do those things, you still see Sunday now as a work stoppage day. That's what you think of Sunday. It's the day I don't work. You've diminished Sunday to becoming the non-work day because the other 6 force you to work. On Saturday, you catch up on all the things you didn't get done Monday through Friday. And on Sunday, you try to stop work. Now, lots of people, when they stop work, look for other things to do. And they do go to museums and movies and have a meal and do these things, but they're not doing them for a Shabbat-related reason. They're doing them in postmodernity because they don't want to work. And this gets their mind off work. Work has become the god that I must avoid on Shabbat. I would suggest we have this upside down. God is the God you want on Shabbat. He gave us work to sanctify the world, not to become enslaved to it. And whether we are Catholic or Jew or Muslim, the Shabbat day, whether it is Friday or Saturday or Sunday, should, I think, be talked about amongst all the families in whatever sports or other weekend activities there are by the hosting associations that empower the activities. So there's a soccer league, and there's lacrosse teams, and there's a city park manager, and there's all these people and organizations. I vote for a brand new American discussion, very PC. Let's talk about what people need to do to observe their Shabbats variously. And then, are you telling me we don't have the brains or creativity to come up with a way to form and structure our leagues and recreation for our kids that can't include these differences? Are we really that helpless? Really? We can't figure out Shabbat because the soccer coach is tapping his toe over in the corner, looking at his watch, saying, hey, we got to get going. I question that. I would like to see American culture stop and transform itself. We've seen this in some big ways. A lot of you are old enough to remember this. And everybody used to say, there's nothing you can do about this, there's nothing, nothing, nothing. Do you remember when drunk driving was not punished? People would drive drunk, get into an accident, hurt someone, and the sheriff and the locals would say, well, that's a shame, but you know, they were drinking. And you're not responsible for it. You can't, but they didn't mean it. No, it's a tragedy. I'm sorry, but there was no punishment for those acts. Until a mom named Candy Leitner had her daughter killed by a drunk driver. And with other moms said, I've had enough of this. Excusing us from responsibility to the things that matter inside our families is unacceptable. She started Mothers Against Drunk Driving, and she has changed American culture, all in the space of about 40 years. The whole thing has changed when it comes to drinking, driving. Punishment and understanding our responsibility is before you drink too much. There's your choice. Can we not take this same spirit and apply it to other areas like family life and Shabbat, plus all the wonderful things we'd like to do on Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays, so that as Christian, Jewish, and Muslim brothers and sisters, we can figure out some new mosaic of inclusion for our kids? I think we can.
American Jews find this country to be a blessed place where the history of anti-Semitism that had been so dominant elsewhere has been marginalized in the United States, even as a time where it is resurgent elsewhere in the world. That's been the general history of the United States, where there has been freedom of access and enjoy all the privileges of being an American. But the reality is, when it came to traditional sports leagues and other kinds of extracurricular activities, there was not much concern historically about confluence with the Jewish Sabbath. And parents had to make difficult choices because many of the leagues played on Saturday morning, but they did not play on Sunday morning. And therefore, this was a much more serious issue for many Jews. Now, for those who were very careful about Jewish law, they did not participate in these Saturday morning opportunities. And many other Jews who were not as concerned about it embraced it as part of the neighborhood that they were trying to integrate within as part of the natural way for young people. So this has not disappeared as a serious issue for the Jewish community. In the community where I live, where there are many observant Jews, this has been resolved in what for me is not a satisfying solution. There are essentially Sabbath observant leagues. Now, what does that mean? Yes, the observant Jews can play all of these sports, but with other observant Jews, not with the vast diversity of Americans in the community. Not to mention the fact that Jews playing sports with Jews is not exactly the same physical activity as Jews playing sports with all people of different origins. You know, the joke about the Encyclopedia of Jews and Sports, it's a very thin volume. So my point here is that this has not really been resolved. The vast majority of American Jews have done what? They've made peace with the fact that these leagues, these sports activities, these extracurricular, often conflict with synagogue service times. The most observant have been consistent, but they are segregated into their own leagues. This is not healthy. There has to be a better way.